All right. Welcome to episode 10 of the Wyld Farm Family Fun Show. On this show, we talk about everything farm, everything family, everything fun, and most importantly, we like to have a little fun with some food with Nick in the kitchen to end the show. Again, I am Troy Rice, the host of the show, co-host Nick, chef in the kitchen there. A little bit about me. I founder of a company called FarmBridge, which we do a lot in the farming community space to help out not only farmers, but farm workers, markets, and local consumers. You'll hear a little bit about from Nick in a minute here, which Nick does a lot of space around food in the kitchen and some other awesome stuff. Then after that, we'll dive into our special guest tonight, Mark Metry, who's going to share his inspiring story with us and dive into an area that is a little bit of a growing concern for the farming community. But Mark's story is truly inspiring. And so we're going to bring Mark on. But Nick, give us a short message, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, brother. And thank you for bringing the energy. I'm really surprised that you have as much energy as you do, Troy, to start this show. Did you not just welcome a beautiful girl named Adeline into the world?
We did, man. We did, actually. She was born last Wednesday at 5 a.m, which all of our kids are night owls. So yes, man, it's been full-time dad for me, and we're doing good managing a house of 4 now. But everything went really well. My wife's doing really well, and baby's good, and boys are loving it. And you know me, man, I'm a big kid, so I'm enjoying every minute of it.
Well, brother, congratulations to you and your wife for welcoming in a baby daughter. And I'm super grateful to hear that everyone in your family is healthy and well. And this is such a great privilege to be co-hosting this platform, this show with you. And, I could sit here and tell you more about myself, but I'm really eager to bring up our guest, Mark, who's going to dive into some really, really critical topics. And so I think, at the end of the show, we're going to kind of have some fun and do some recipes. And I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, but I want to celebrate you, Troy, and acknowledge your awesomeness and being a dad of 4, that's unbelievable. And I really would love to just turn it over to Mark at this time. So
you got it, buddy. Plus, I want to catch up on your underwater basket weaving time.
In the tub all day long, bro. I'm now I can hold my breath up for 2 minutes. So I think I'm gonna win just on the fact that I can hold my breath the longest. So
awesome. Well, without further ado, I can't wait to introduce our special guest tonight. So as I alluded to in the intro, depression and suicide, unfortunately, and mental health is a growing concern amongst the agriculture community. And so we wanted to do our best to kind of bring on an expert in this space to share his inspiring story, a message of how he's completely changed that around. He's doing some awesome things in the world, which you're going to hear about as well. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Mark Metry, who is global top 100 podcast host for the Human 2.0 podcast, a keynote speaker, author of Screw Being Shy, as well as a accelerator podcast program that he created to help people like Nick and I actually grow their exposure and their audience to reach the people and add value to this world. But Mark, welcome to the show, man.
Welcome, Mark.
Troy, Nick, thank you guys so much for having me. And Troy, thank you so much for having time to do this, man. I had completely forgotten about your last week going on. That's amazing, man. And my sister, she had a baby last year, and I helped her a lot. And I just have so much more respect for parents and what you go through. It's like the hardest job ever. So I can't, thank you for still having time to do this, man. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on.
I think most importantly, I probably owe a thank you to my wife, right? She's down there managing all right now for an hour, and so bless her heart for allowing us to do this. But yeah, so Mark, tell us your story. And so I know, and for our listeners, I'm going to chat in your information, your website and things like that, which I want to share too. On your website, you have an incredible timeline of your history of as a kid all the way to what you do now, which is amazing to help understand. But kind of walk us through your journey of entrepreneurship, the struggles along the way, and how you landed to where you're at today.
Yeah. So, honestly, the best way that I found to, kind of describe myself is, every single day today, what I do for a living is I do basically the exact opposite of what I tried my hardest not to do for most of my life. And that was basically just speak up. And I remember, for the longest time, my life, my thinking was always just, I don't want anybody to know who I am. I don't have a story. I want to go by kind of invisible and sort of muted in this world. And, like you introduced me, Troy, today, I have a podcast. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I'm an entrepreneur. All these things that I kind of sort of suppress about myself, I express in all the things that I do. And so, for me, I'm pretty young. I'm 23, but I've been an entrepreneur for like the last 10 years. I had a very successful business even when I was a young kid, which really changed my life. But for me, my parents, they immigrated to this country from the Middle East, from Egypt. And, they sort of hustled. They, kind of worked whatever jobs they could kind of find here on the East Coast in Massachusetts. And, we just sort of did what we had to do to get by. And, for me, a really interesting time in my life that I remember where things kind of changed was we kind of moved from the inner city to a more rural area where, there was, like 5,000 people, very small town. I actually remember there being a lot of farms there. And there's a lot of great people there, but, obviously just like in every place, there's always the good and the bad. And I remember at this time in America, this was like post 9/11. And so I remember if you were like Middle Eastern, or if you were Arab, then there was definitely quite a lot of like hatred and sort of like racism kind of hurled at you. And so I remember being a kid and being in this community, this environment where nobody kind of, looked like me. I was the only person who was different. And I remember there's maybe like myself and like a family or two in that entire town who were just, different races. And so I remember there just being a lot of like racism, a lot of hatred. And I remember at that time, I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't, know what it was like, or not know what it was like. I didn't know how to handle it. And so I remember just sort of like retracting in my shell and almost just being like, hey, I just like never want to speak up to anybody. And so from then on out, for like the next 10 years, I was just like that kid who was always like the quietest person, who sat in the back, who never had any friends, was always by himself. And so I remember that being my life for the longest time. And now I know that was basically, kind of social anxiety. And that was also, at the same time that was happening, I was also facing different like physical health problems as well. Things like asthma, ADHD, different issues with like my stomach, like a lot of physical and sort of, on the mental health side as well. And so for me, that ended up basically by the time I was 18. And also keep in mind at that time, I was running like a 6-figure business. I was pretty successful at that time in terms of my finances, but in terms of sort of what I was facing on the inside, I was terrible. And I remember I got to a spot where I just didn't know what to do with like the amount of pain in my life. And I started to do all these different kinds of things. Like I started to drink, I started to eat a lot. I started to oversleep, undersleep. And like next thing I know, my lifelong social anxiety that I always kind of had now sort of becomes social isolation. I stopped seeing people. I don't want to see any of my friends, nobody. And I really start to get kind of depressed for the first time in my life. And next thing I know, I gain a ton of weight. I'm now obese. And there was a time even where I was pretty suicidal for about a month for the first time in my life ever. And eventually it was kind of going through that really rocky time in my life that really woke me up to like, wow, I had no idea this could happen, unfortunately. And it was almost not until I saw like these different, sides of me come out because of sort of what happened in life. And ever since then, that was about like, 2015. So been about like 5 years, 6 or sometime around then. Ever since then, I've really just been taking steps like every breathing moment of my life to just try to understand myself better, to improve my health, my mental health, my physical health, to try to develop real relationships, figure out my purpose in the world. I, didn't really, nothing was overnight. It definitely took me like days and weeks and months and years of me just trying to figure out how to sort of find this path that I kind of felt like I was just creating as I was going. But eventually, I'm glad that it happened, and it's led me to this point where I honestly never thought I'd be. And in a way where, like I'm really able to have like a great life, and from really every perspective that's important to me about the most important things, like my family, my happiness, my mental health, what I'm able to do. And it's and now knowing everything I know, I understand that, like, I really understand that there really is a path for people to actually get out of this. And the reality is that there's so many people who are what I would say are like kind of stuck, like similar to what I described. And it's not because like they're lazy, or it's not because like they're not smart enough, or they're not talented, or they don't work as hard. And it's just like, if I wish somebody could have like sat me and kind of like told me everything that I know now, and I would have understand that it's almost kind of like it's like a subtle art, and it's like a science that once you sort of learn, and it's different for everybody, but once you sort of learn how to do that, there is definitely is sort of like a light at the end of the tunnel. And I've had the privilege of really just like seeing all kinds of people, because of like my career and my job, of people's just like lives changed in front of my eyes all the time now. And it's just really led me to understand that, for people out there, whether they have no money, or they've, endured a really terrible experience that they shouldn't deserve to, there's definitely a way out, and so that's the biggest thing that I've come to learn. And that's what I'm trying to do now with my career, is just trying to kind of like describe and kind of offer and try to help people also, a way out, through a variety of different, subjects and areas that I've, kind of been exploring over the last, part of my life.
Yeah, incredible, man. You touched on a few things in there, which I would love to dive deeper into. And so, you mentioned it involves weight gain, like obesity. And so, obesity is a growing concern for the U.S. too. I think it was crazy, up to like 20% of kids between ages 2 and 19 are obese these days. And it's all connected to the foods we eat, the systems that we have in place, the access to poor foods. And so throw mental health in there, and it becomes a physical and mental battle for people to be able to try and feed their bodies and their minds the right things they need. And so can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what were some things that really got you through that, for people that are struggling through that right now?
Yeah. So, it's so interesting, because the more and more I talk to, kind of people about this, the more I understand that a lot of the times there's just like so much like, misinformation out there that has driven people to really kind of like falsely have these false beliefs. And food and weight is especially like a big one. And for me, my understanding growing up was, I always knew that, hey, if I ate too much food, then I'm gonna gain weight, right? And I don't want to gain weight, because then nobody will like me. I'll just be fat. And maybe there was, maybe there will be some health issues too. But for me, I think what really changed was I just really just started to understand what food was. And food for me was this, just whatever I could find to sort of just like satisfy this hunger that happens, 3-4 times a day. And I just kind of like shove anything down there, and I hope it doesn't taste terrible, and it just kind of makes me full. And if I eat too much of it, then I'll gain weight. And that for me was like my previous understanding. But now what I've been able to understand is, basically it's like, ever since you're born, And like, for example, like your child who was just born last week, right? Like all of her cells, her entire body, has been given to her from her mom, right?
Mhm.
And ever since that point, basically the way that a person grows up and grows and develops, it is all being fueled by, what they're being fed, their food, right? And so that seems like a very simple process, something we should all know. But I honestly had no idea that, you don't want your brain to be made out of Doritos, right? Or you don't want your lungs to be made out of brownies, right? Like that's not a good recipe if you want all those sort of like cells to function in a sort of a proper way. And so now my understanding has changed to like, wait, no, you literally are the foods that you eat. Like the foods that you eat are burned through your stomach, it gets processed through your gut microbiome, it's sent around all your cells. There's like this very, very sort of, insane process that involves trillions of cells that happens like every single second. And food is the way that we can control that. And so I think that I wish somebody would have told me that, because if somebody did, then it would have been like, okay, depending on what you put in your mouth, that's actually a sign of, I'm not going to say like what you value important, because if you don't know about this, or if you don't have access to this food, then, you can't really do much. But I think it starts with that conversation of just changing the way that we talk about food and kind of eating from, hey, if I just eat too much of this, I'm going to gain weight. And I don't want to gain weight because then that'll sort of decrease my position in sort of society's status, compared to, wait, let me just make sure that like I'm taking care of this machine first. And I know if I can do that, then that'll best prepare me to take care of myself. And I mean, I talk about this in my book, and I'm sure we'll get to this too, but I think one of the biggest things is that it's so important to eat healthy, because that controls your body. That controls like the hardware of life, really, and a lot of the times people talk about, their mindset or their mind, but your mindset lives in your brain, which is the physical hardware operating system, which is directly sort of grown through the diet that you eat, and so there's so much I can talk about there, but I think that needs to be the first understanding of like, we just have to, shift the paradigm of understanding of, it's not about, what tastes good or what you can eat just so you can not be hungry, or like the fears that we have around gaining weight, but more of like, hey, let's just look at this more from a perspective of, like a car, like, hey, you don't put Kool-Aid down your car. You put the gasoline, the premium gasoline, or what, if you have a truck, you put the diesel, it's almost that sort of similar way of thinking. So I think that has to be number one, because I think a lot of the times people don't make sort of this behavior change around eating more healthy a lot of the time because of emotional reasons. A lot of the time it has to do with shame. And so I think sort of part of what's fueling that sort of fuel of shame and being ashamed or binge eating and all these different things is saying like, hey, like food is not, it's not like a moral issue. It's not about, you getting fat and nobody liking you. It's just about like, this is a health thing, and just teach people the truth, which is the reality is that most people sort of over consume foods and are addicted to foods because they're made to be addicting. Like every single junk food company has a board of marketers and psychologists and food scientists that know a lot of these things that I'm saying about food science way more than the average population, and they know how to manipulate that. And so, we just live in a society where the average person isn't taught about these things. And like, if you don't know, the system will destroy you. That's how it's, sort of set up. And I don't know what your background is, but like for me, when my parents came to America, we just sort of consumed like the American lifestyle because, like junk food, all that stuff was the cheapest. Right. And so if you don't know about this stuff, you can really be harming yourself in a lot of, different ways. And so I think food is the number one place that you almost have to start with, because, not everybody is going to run a marathon. Not everyone is going to read a book a week. not everyone is gonna, meditate, but everybody eats, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if we can start that conversation around there, then it's like, even if you can't, afford whatever it is, organic, this, push yourself on the really healthy extreme, just do what you can, as long as you have this awareness and this sense that this is a very important life. And so, or aspect of life. And that's why I'm so grateful to be on like a podcast like this, where I'm sure everyone in this community, knows that very well, or at least some parts of it and how it's important.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I mean, so like from a marketing perspective, the large food business companies have really put a mark on what is marketed out there, what's in stores. I mean, the only country that has been able to push change to ban and place a tax on sugary foods like junk food and pops and candies is Chile. Every other country has actually nixed that because of all the money that's involved. And so what happens is you have kids that grow up that are consumed by the marketing aspects of what's out there. And then, like you said, and I know you've saw some of our content in the past, which is like, there's hidden sugars in everything, right? We think we see a zero fat or a low sugar content or something, but there's hidden sugars in every serving. There's dyes, and talk about like behavioral changes, like what you feed your body impacts your mind. And so there's a lot of studies out there about food dyes and everything that has yellow 5 and blue 40 and all that and everything, and what that's your behavioral mindset. And so there are definitely a lot of external factors out there that don't allow us to make easy decisions, but it does start with asking better questions and knowing where your food comes from. But let's dive in. You mentioned Screw being shy, and you want to dive in a little bit deeper there. So walk us through the journey that inspired you to write the book, and then some big takeaways for people that would make them curious about buying the book and learning from you.
Yeah. So, first off, I just want to respond to what you said. And, it's really crazy because when I was writing my book, Screw Being Shy, I really wanted to make sure that, I kind of did my research and, I referenced the right people who are, much smarter than me in these various fields that I talk about. And one of the most mind-blowing things that I found was two things in particular. One of them was there was this study done in the UK. So I think it was specifically on food dyes. And it showed, I need to reference, I don't remember the numbers, but it showed that, in a certain population of kids, especially that consumed a lot of these food dyes, a lot of them were much more prone to having behavioral issues, like not focusing, not being able to sit down. Yeah. And another study that was done in South Korea, also with kids, showed that there's a direct correlation of having depressive and suicidal thoughts in children, depending on their diet and junk food, which is like the American standard diet. And so, it's crazy. And again, I'm not saying that, if you eat like a pound of broccoli every day, all your problems in life will go away. But there are some very real, factors that we just have to talk about. And I think these are especially the most important to talk about right now, because there's always a delay and a lag behind public awareness, the science, and then sort of the legal and like the medical industries and sectors. Wow. And so I can guarantee you that, 25, 50 years from now, everything that we're talking about in terms of these harmful ingredients is going to be already known. And there is already a big shift that's happening from smart companies that are starting to look at what's happening in the market, and they're changing. And I bet you that in 5 years, I bet you can get any kind of like junk food on like a much, 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 much healthier version for sure. It's already happening by mass. Companies are starting to listen. They're starting to change where they're getting their ingredients from, and it's happening. But I think for right now, it's especially really important to talk about because we're not there yet. And so you have to sort of know these things to be able to make that change. And so so this book, Screw Being Shy. So I wrote it because in 2019, before COVID shut down everything, I went on a speaking tour across basically the biggest cities in America. And I kind of like spoke about my story. I spoke at different conferences and stuff. And so it depended on what I would speak on. But almost in every single city, I would notice basically the same exact thing would happen. And there would be one person who would walk up to me, at least one person after the show, and people would line up and try to ask me a question or something. And there's always be that one person who would say, hey, Mark, how did you basically learn how to speak up and be yourself, after telling people that you have social anxiety, couldn't speak to anybody for over a decade. And a lot of times I would notice that this kind of person who'd walk up to me, they would probably be looking down. They wouldn't make a direct eye contact. Maybe in their voice, they would stutter a little bit. Maybe they would hesitate. They would mumble. And I remember being that same exact person. And so after seeing that in almost every single major city I went to, and then also just like doing my research and looking and seeing what's out there of like, what books are there out there for people who, have like really extreme, they're very, very, very shy. Maybe they have social anxiety. Maybe they've always been called like a quiet introvert their whole life. What other resources are there out there? And there were definitely some good books for sure, but I didn't really find a book that kind of encompassed the whole kind of like holistic pie that I sort of just had to discover on my own journey. And so ever since that moment, I just started writing this book because I was like, man, this has got to get out there because there's so many people who, what I would call and describe as like living in like a quiet, like prison in their own mind, where they're not even necessarily antisocial or they don't like people, but a lot of times their brain just holds them back. And I remember for me, growing up, almost for like 10 years, literally being in like social scenarios every day where I want to say something, I want to talk, but my brain would just like hold me back. And every time that happens, there's also another consequence that happens. And that's usually to, your self-esteem, to your confidence, to how much that affects you. And when things start to hurt your self-esteem, that's where they really begin to, really impact like your mental health at a serious level. And one of the reasons why I also wrote this book is because, I see so many kids growing up today and they're sort of living their lives under this, under like this innocent label of like being shy or being quiet or being an introvert. And again, I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. There's nothing wrong with being like a quiet person. There's nothing wrong with being shy. Every once in a while, being shy is a totally normal sort of emotion. But there are some people who they get shy in every single scenario that they are in. And when it gets to that life and it really begins to impact your behavior, and then eventually over a series of years, your self-esteem, that's where you get a lot of serious problems. And I think the final straw that really led me to writing this book was, seeing out there like in the data and the statistics that out of all of the different mental health conditions and problems out there in America is what I looked at. Social anxiety is one of the most common. And out of all the mental health problems, social anxiety is also the most correlated with substance abuse and social isolation, both of which have increasing higher rates of suicide. And then I remember sort of going through what I went through when I was 18 and almost being suicidal and being like, oh, wow, that was actually because of this whole social anxiety problem that I had for my entire life that ultimately led me to that spot at 18 where I thought I, had to kill myself and, face these other issues. And so kind of connecting all these dots, I was like, man, I really have to write this book. I really have to get this out there because there are so many people that are facing this. And like quick update, like the book came out in March. The book came out the day the world shut down. It came out in the middle of March, early March. And it hasn't even been a year yet. It's about to be a year though. So far, book has sold 14,000 copies, not including the audiobook. I think the audiobook is like 1,000 now. It came out later. So like maybe like over 15,000, which is awesome. And I get feedback. I receive all kinds of messages from people and parents and their kids And it's been great because, this has been my first book. I'm already working on my second one, but it's just been great to do that and kind of just be like, hey, I need to really talk about this. Because honestly, I could have written a book about something way different that probably could have made me more money, that probably could have been more beneficial for like my business and my career. But I was just like, I have to write this book because this is the most important thing to the people who are facing this problem and facing and having this problem. In my opinion, I think it's like a silent epidemic. In my opinion, I think it's one of the worst problems today because it's almost invisible. And especially now with COVID and with quarantine and the different effects of that, I think it's made that a lot worse. And so, I learned a lot, and I'm definitely ready to try to get back at it and see how, people can, learn from more things and whatnot. So,
yeah, it's so important, man. I know you, I believe you know who Will Holdren is. He's a friend of mine and runs a Willpower podcast. And, just even listening to him. So, he went off to college and then they shut everything down, right? He was playing basketball there and they even shut that down too. And so it's just, there's a dynamic there for high school students where all their sports are being canceled and shut down. And for some of them, that's their outlet. That's their way that they socially engage with those that they care about around something that they're passionate in. And, then you couple that with going off to college, which is supposed to be another social way to build relationships and everything, and same thing. And so I could see your book just being a tremendously powerful tool and insightful tool for those kids, for high school students and college students to just really get a grasp on where they're at in life, how they're feeling, what the external economic factors are, and how they could push through that, especially as young as they are. I mean, you commented on how young you are too. But really getting that experience, right? Learning that from you firsthand, and then having a book that actually kind of walks them through that thought process of how they can overcome that despite circumstances that they can't control.
Can I jump in with a question, Troy? You brought something up. So I was in seeing my doctor today, and he was sharing like, wow, like my whole role as a doctor to treat the physical body has like shifted. Yes, he still treats the physical body, but he was also like, I'm dealing with mental and emotional issues like in like a way that I've never dealt with. And we got into this long conversation. And Mark, I'm curious, like your thoughts, given, like all of the social activities that we can be a part of now in this age of COVID, and like with people dealing with social anxiety, like one, I think like, oh, like that's automatic permission that I don't need to participate. And two, it's disrupting how like we are like learning to be human and connected. So I'm curious, like maybe your next book is sort of broaching this subject, and maybe it can tie into a little bit about your interest, Troy, about farming communities and everything here. But I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are as like what we're truly facing as a result of this whole pandemic and social anxiety and social community disruption.
Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I was going to come out with a second version of my book like a month after it launched, but I decided to wait a little bit because I wanted to just see what would happen with this whole COVID and lockdown and quarantine stuff. And yeah, I mean, so much has changed. I mean, like there's like a subsection in my chapter in my book in a chapter about like learning confidence, and there's a part about there in terms of body language and like your face, for example. And so we wear masks. So that's changed. There's been so many different things that have changed. And, I really don't know, how long, the sort of the current situation, is going to last. And I'm sure it depends on where you live. For some people, they're not allowed to even like leave their house. But I mean, for example, where I live on the East Coast, like in Massachusetts, I mean, you could basically do everything. You just have to wear a mask. So there's been a lot of things that have been opening up. And so that's definitely given me faith regarding, like, things regarding like social communities and things that, you just can't replace through a screen, through Zoom, no matter how much you try. And so I definitely have faith that like some things will definitely get better, but who knows with different things happening. And so I honestly think that we just need to sort of like focus on what we can control. Right. And like, just as like another example that maybe to you guys seems crazy. But like, for example, I'm in the technology circle a lot, and like I'm invested in some companies, for example, that are into like virtual reality. And for example, virtual reality is something that I never thought would be like a feasible, realistic tool up until quarantine hit. And the reason why I say that is because if you're inside all day and you're so like your mind is like so like mentally bored, there's different tools that we can now like access in a good way with technology that can help the average person do different things that we wouldn't do. And so, for example, like in VR, there's like different social apps. There's like an interactive breathing app that can like coach you how to like meditate and breathe, and certain exercises that can change like your mental state. And so there's like, I think now, who knows how long this whole thing is going to last. But I think ultimately we just have to start designing like a new, different kind of lifestyle. And I think there's parts to this that kind of suck, because I definitely believe that human beings are the happiest when we are the most integrated with nature. And I think across the various systems, whether it's food, whether it's moving your body, whether it's the sun, the water, the different kinds of, sourcing, nature is very, very important. And so I think we have to enter in like this new sphere of trying to redesign a lifestyle that works in 2021, that lets us use and really integrate ourselves into nature, but while also having smarter tech tools that can help us live our lives better without distracting us. Because unfortunately, I mean, one of the biggest things that I would say is that in a world where like we use our phones for everything, for the people who, have no purpose, or people who just, are just normal, like myself included, it's going to be so much easier to live in a virtual world where it's totally different than in the physical world. And there can be a lot of different consequences that can come from the digital world, whether it's, social media, video games, pornography, that can happen to like a population of people alongside like other mental health problems. And so that definitely worries me, but I just think that we need to like have more conversations about this. But I mean, on average, I think they say that on average, these things were supposed to last like 2 years, like a worst case scenario. So, I mean, I don't know, but, I'm not really sure. But I think all in all, it really has to come down to what we can control. And I don't think anybody has like the complete answers, but I think it's definitely time for like innovation, experimentation, curiosity, because we definitely have to adapt to like our society and the world that the way it is, as the way that humans have always been adapting, to the world. I mean, this has happened before. And so, I'm sure we'll get through it, but it's definitely a struggle. But, I think it's just, focusing on like the 3, 4, 5 most important things to you in your life, and just figuring out a pragmatic way to get to each of those. And if there was something that you really did like to enjoy, previously in pre-COVID world, you just have to find a way to figure out like an appropriate substitute for you that can achieve that same need. Like for example, like I like pre-COVID, man, I would travel all the time. I would speak. I would literally love it. Like, it'd literally be my, such an amazing part. And honestly, when COVID, I honestly kind of felt like that part of me sort of died. And it sucks to say. And I would do like these virtual speaking things, but honestly, I mean, it's nothing compared to like the whole experience of like traveling and speaking and kind of doing that whole thing. And so, it's just finding different, examples where you can do that, doing that on like a smaller scale, with your friends or, whatever you can do. And I think that's what life is. Life is all about, making the right kinds of like switches so that you can improve, switch out one thing for another. Like I used to be addicted to soda. I used to chug soda all the time, but then I switched and I started drinking. I don't really drink it that much anymore, but sometimes I do. It's called Zevia, where basically it's like this kind of soda that has no sugar. They make it out of like stevia, this natural sweetener.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that's what it's about. And so again, I don't have the answers to how we're going to figure this time out, but I think it's just kind of looking at it pragmatically and just coming up with figuring out, developing a new relationship with technology. I think now that we're on it like all the time, like we have to come out with like a more realistic way of looking at technology in a way that we can integrate ourselves into it, but it doesn't take away from our lives and we're not distracted by it. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would honestly be focusing on. And I hope this doesn't last long. Like I said, hopefully the worst case it lasts 2 years, but it's definitely challenging for everyone, all of us.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say, and Nick can jump in and agree with this, but one of the main reasons that we started this show was because of a way to pivot, to just be able to have conversations with people out in the world that we may get to meet in person if COVID wasn't here. But having the chance to just be on camera, share our stories, share their stories, and just have some laughter, because it does feel like sitting in a dark room in the twilight zone sometimes. It truly does. Even with a big family. I mean, I have a big family, and it still feels like that sometimes. We're social creatures. So yeah, thanks for that question, Nick. And it's great to hear it coming from. I think you said you're a physician, right?
Correct. Yes.
So I mean, it's not just. I know we talked a lot about the youth or students and everything, or entrepreneurs that could be going through this, but anybody behind closed doors could potentially go through this mindset. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Of course, man.
It was a loaded question, but you handled it really beautifully. And I love, controlling what you can and letting go of what you can't. And sometimes it's easily said and not always easily done, but I hear that's absolutely so pragmatic and realistic.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'd also say too, maybe for all we know, it's a good thing that your physician said that, because maybe people are getting into a spot where people are just more comfortable about talking about this stuff. And I wrote this article the other week, and I said, the next epidemic, if it's not happening already, is the mental health epidemic. And so I think that with this COVID-19 pandemic, I think it's really led us to sort of expose these different areas of our society. And so for all I know, I know the rates are increased more, but I also think people are also more willing to talk about these things. Whereas, I know that when my sister, who's like 10 years older than me, or even my parents were growing up, nobody would talk about this stuff, or they'd talk about it in a completely more inflammatory, non-understanding way that would just hurt people, And so I hope people talk about this more and more, because I think that's the first step in solving any kind of problem. We have to talk about it. We have to, encourage people that it's okay, that it's a normal part of being a human being. And so, I'm definitely an optimist, but you have to have that silver lining for sure, because like I said, I definitely have hope for sure. I think for sure this is definitely a big issue. It's definitely going to hurt people, but I definitely think it's a slight opener, awakener for all of us. So I think it'll be good overall for us to, really show us that this stuff really is, important, and what happens when you basically just lock humans in for like a year inside. It's not a good idea.
It's great data, right? Like, oh, look at what happens when you lock everyone.
It's a crazy experiment. Crazy experiment. I never want it to happen again. Never want it to happen again, ever. It'd be a good story for my kids one day when I have kids.
There you go. Well, cool. Well, last thing I'd love to end with here, Mark, is all the great stuff that you're doing. Can you share with our listeners how they can connect with you? I'm going to post links in the comment box here. It's also in the post of this video and the podcast. But maybe share a little bit more about Human 2.0, what people could expect if they're interested in listening in on that podcast that you host, or any of your other services as far as like your accelerator program for podcasts and things like that.
Yeah, so a good central spot is my website, Mark Metry, MarkMetry.com. And yeah, so definitely check out my book if any of that stuff interested you. Screw Being Shy, anywhere you buy books. Check out my podcast, Humans 2.0, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And yeah, I've made a recent change with it recently where, I've done over like 300 plus interviews over the last several years. And now I'm heading to a spot where, I just want to more or less bring on different kinds of experts that can teach people in different areas of life. And so, if that interests you, definitely check it out. And yeah, in terms of anything business related, I do a lot of work in the podcast LinkedIn area. I run a business called Growcast.co, GROWCASTS.co. Ooh, almost messed that up. You can check that out if you're interested in that stuff. And yeah, thank you guys so much for this. So when do we see this food? I want to see this recipe happen.
Yeah. So and you beat me to it, Mark. So what we like to do is we like to invite our guests to stay on if they have the time, and then we kick it over to Nick. Nick whips up some things in the kitchen. In the past, he's done like sweet potato brownies. I believe we've done some chicken salad. Oh yeah. And so he's going to take it away. We share a recipe with the listeners as well, so that they can take that home. And then if they're curious in what Nick does, he also helps serve the community with his cooking shows, online videos, recipes, and all different types of things as he is a glorified, awesome chef. So if you want to stick around, Mark, we'd love to have you. I will slide Nick over to take it away.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Troy, and thank you, Mark, for being our guest here today. And wow, like I'm just blown away by what you're up to in the world and just your mastery of yourself and like what you have overcome. Like that is absolutely stunning and amazing, and I can relate in different ways from what you've had to go through. So thank you for sharing from your heart and for giving our listeners your experience, strength, and hope for the future. So okay, we're gonna try to be very congruent here with this recipe with the Wyld brain boosting smoothie.
Awesome.
So I'm actually one of the things I've really overlooked since I've started doing this platform is actually I can't believe that I have, but this really goes, I think, very in line with what Mark was talking about as far as like the connection between the brain and the gut. And so actually, like every time I step into the kitchen, whether I'm going to prepare breakfast, lunch, dinner, or even my dog's food, like I want to take 3 to 5 big, deep breaths, like just to get centered, to get present. And what I'm really doing when I do that is I'm going to be calming down my head, and I'm also going to be calming down my gut. And as a result of calming down both, I'm going to better to be able to absorb the nutrients of the food that the beautiful Mother Earth gave to us. So we're going to put nature in a cup and drink it on down. So let's just take 3 big deep breaths. And I feel like I'm a new man. All right. So equipment that you're going to need. So this baby goes into a blender. So you're going to need your, whatever, it's a Vitamix, a Ninja, whatever whatever the scale is for your mixer. So it's a very super simple and very fast wild brain boosting smoothie. This could be made ahead of time, and it could be like the first or second thing that you consume to start your day. So it could be made like the night before. That's sometimes what I do. So we're going to start with a cup of some kind of milk. It could be nut milk. I'm using oat milk for mine. So I'm going to put 1 cup of nut milk into the blender. And to cut down on sugar, I'm going to leave out the banana. I know the recipe calls for banana. I've got a friend that told me that fruit is the Oreo cookie of the paleo diet. So, so if you're really watching your sugar, you may want to nix on the banana. It's not like that bad, but I mean, I just kind of forgot to buy it at the store, so I needed to cover my own butt here. So, all right. So I'm putting about a cup of frozen blueberries in here. And then I'm going to take a big whopping glop of spinach. I'm going to put that down, shove that down in there. And so why is this a brain boosting smoothie? Well, you have the antioxidants of the blueberries. We're going to throw in some almond butter or some kind of nut butter along with the nut milk, which are good essential fatty acids. We're also going to throw in some flax seeds, which are great omega-3s. These are all ingredients that are really going to help satisfy the gut, and it's going to help get that brain boosting for when you read Mark's book.
Yes.
So I'm also going to throw in just a little knob of ginger, just to give it a little bit of just a slight little kick. And I don't bother with peeling the skin off of the ginger. I don't know. I do rinse it, but it's not something that I'm too terribly concerned about. All right, so I have the blueberries, the nut milk. Forgot the banana, the spinach, the ginger, and I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons worth of almond butter up in here. I'm just going to eyeball it. You could also use like fresh macadamia nuts. That's also a really great nut to be used, or macadamia nut butter. I forgot my wand, but let's see. So I'm going to put all these ingredients in here. I'm going to zap her up. She got a little brown, but that's okay. That happens when you combine green and blue together, as you get brown. So sometimes it's green, sometimes it's blue.
Hey, Nick, I was going to share a fun fact. I was going to share a fun fact for you. You were mentioning almond nuts, and so since we're talking a lot about the brain, your neurons are very fatty tissue, and so therefore it requires fatty foods. And so you mentioned omega-3s and nuts and everything, and so just a little bit of a neuroscience for people out there, that the more fatty oils, olive oils, nuts, and things like that you consume can actually help out your fatty tissue and your neurons.
Yeah, and also a fun fact too. And there's a part of my book where I literally write down the recipe for this shake to make. I literally don't have any other recipe in my book except for this. I mean, mine's a little bit different. I add celery, and I add coconut milk, and I add avocado too. But it's like literally the same recipe, and like that's so funny. That's so awesome.
That's really great. That's funny. There's many different recipes. I would love to try yours, Mark. That sounds really super delicious. Like I could even throw a jalapeno in here, like just because I like.
I don't know about that.
Why not, right? So to finish this baby off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little dash of cinnamon on top.
Mm.
And then why not make it look pretty with a little bit more fat with some coconut on top.
Oh, wow. You're going all out.
So there you go. You have the Wyld brain boosting smoothie. I use my reusable straw because I'm trying to save the planet. And voila. I make this the night before, make it right away in the morning.
Yes.
And it's nature in a cup. And yes. Yeah, so there we go. Wyld brain boosting smoothie in congruence with Mark and his beautiful knowledge about the gut and the brain and food. So there we go.
Awesome, Nick. I shared your recipe link. I shared your recipe link with everybody. And I also shared Nick's website. So if you want to learn more about some cooking things and recipes that Nick does, he does some awesome things out there. Nick, if they live in and around the community where you're at in Minnesota, will you cook for them, or is it no? Okay. I just wanted to check on that because I know some people would love to learn if that was a possibility and get to work with you. So.
Yeah, I have so if people are interested in learning to cook with me, I have a new offer coming out, which is going to be like a bi-weekly kind of like cooking webinar where we learn something about being human and then integrate it with the process of cooking.
Okay. Awesome.
So it's going to be like, I'm going to be like Mr. Miyagi. And everyone's going to be my students. And, it's not going to be karate, but you're going to learn a lot about life, and you're going to cook some food, and you're going to be able to share it with someone that you really, 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 truly care about.
Maybe some underwater basket weaving?
And that too, bro.
All right. Well, cool. All right. I'll close us out for the day. Again, a special thank you to Mark Metry. Thank you for all your awesome insights, man. It's really great to see you too. I know we interact quite a few times through the digital space, but it's really great to see your face and have this conversation with you. So thanks again for joining us, man. Loved it. To close this out, again, this is the Wyld Farm Show. We talk about everything family, farm, and fun. We dove into a little bit of topics around depression and suicide, obesity, and how we can gain control of our lives and think about those things through our journey as we progress. And so we hope you enjoyed this episode. Although there was parts in there we wanted to dig in deep because there's a growing concern in the farming community. We also had some fun with Mark, learned about his new book, and awesome, as always, had some fun with Nick. So thank you again for joining us. Everybody supports us. Thank you to everybody that watches this later. We have also put this into a podcast just recently. We're still starting to grow that. You'll see episodes on that. It can be streamed almost on every channel that you listen to podcasts on. So we're trying to grow that, but at least right now you can check it out on Apple Podcasts, I believe Google Podcasts soon, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, and a few others coming soon. So thank you for your support. Thanks for joining Nick and I. We always have a lot of fun, and we hope you have a great week.
Thank you, Troy.